Mr. Otway here to help you out with your green pen improvements. Now the problem with green pen improvement lessons is you've only got one teacher and sometimes there's 30 of you. Well, with this video you should be able to pause and read certain bits that you need and listen to the section that you need so that you can get the help you need to be able to do improvements on your essay depending on what your teacher has suggested you need to improve on. My big recommendation to you is to pause the video when you need to, or rewind if you need to and listen to something again. Of course, this is no substitute for listening to your teacher, so if you do need your teacher, put your hand up, but this is an alternative whilst you're waiting for their attention. So what I've done here is I've made a silly example essay to try to show you some of the things that you should be doing in your essay. And mine is not the main consequence of the Crusades, but the Christmas holidays. And not the Europeans building stronger castles, but the fact that the Christmas holidays made me less healthy is the main consequence. And history is not a story, it's an argument. So you have to start with your argument clearly set out. And here you see in my short introduction, I clearly believe that it's not the fact that I became less healthy, but that it was that I grew more cheerful. Now you need to look at your answer. And if you've been given this target, you need to think, is my argument clear? Well, almost certainly not if you've had this target. So you need to think, did you think that building stronger castles was, Europeans building stronger castles was the main consequence? Or did you think it was something else? Maybe it was some of the knowledge that came back from the Crusades. Maybe it's some of the benefits for the health and medical knowledge that came back. Trade, perhaps. Whatever it was, your main consequence of the Crusades needs to be right there in your face at the start of your essay. Well, another thing that's on your sheet is you have to refer to other points of view. As you can see me doing here, you don't contradict it and say this is right too. You have to say, I can see why other people might argue this thing, and as we will come to see, you ultimately then go on and say, but it's still wrong. But this is the sort of way you could introduce an alternative argument in one of your paragraphs. Now it's no good introducing an alternative view without proving it wrong. So here you see at the end of that paragraph I would have written, because I disagree that it was me getting less healthy. So Mr. Otway's unhealthy lifestyle over Christmas undoubtedly had an impact of him becoming poorly, which is significant, but I've done this before, so it wouldn't have had that huge of an impact because I won't still be here, and I'm generally quite healthy, so it wouldn't have made that much difference. So as a consequence, Mr. Otway becoming unhealthy isn't the biggest. I've proven why that wasn't and argued why that is not the most important consequence. For you, whatever it was that you thought was not such an important consequence, you would have to argue why it's not as important as your main choice, as your main important consequence. It's a tricky skill that you're being asked to do for this one. You might need some pointers from the teacher, but ultimately that's what you've got to do, and hopefully if you've paused and you look at my example, you can use some phrases and methods to do that same sort of thing yourself on your Crusades essay. Well, this is quite straightforward. This could be a detail thing, you might not have written enough, but a history essay would always, absolutely unquestionably, have an introduction to the argument and a conclusion. The introduction's where you set out what your argument's going to be, and conclusions where you sort of summarise and prove why your argument is right. And before the conclusion and after the introduction, you would usually have 2 or 3 paragraphs in your answer. And you can see, although I've not written the whole example essay, you can see in bold in my example, hopefully in the screenshot, you would have 3 paragraphs, because I was trying to do an excellence example. You might only have 2, but I would have 3 paragraphs, all of about the same length of that first one, which is a big ask of course, with my introduction and my conclusion. So hopefully you can see how a history essay should look, roughly, from my screenshot. As you should know by now, History is not a story, it's an argument. So every paragraph must start with an argued point. An argued point that should not contradict your overall argument. Now, in my silly example essay, I think me becoming more cheerful is the most important consequence. So hopefully you can see from my example paragraph openers here that you have to make a firm, clear point at the start of your paragraphs. Could you do this? Maybe you think that the development of greater knowledge, like the discovery of greater knowledge, was in other spheres other than just castles, was more important as a consequence of the Crusades. Well, your paragraph on castles might be, although some people could argue that castles were a very important consequence, I believe that the discovery of greater knowledge was a more important consequence, or greater knowledge in other areas. Or you could say, I believe the development of trade between the Middle East and Europe was a greater consequence. So you just use my examples here to try to develop your points that follow on from your overall argument for this essay. Well, this one should be fairly straightforward in terms of understanding. To have the strongest possible argument, you have the most possible evidence. For example, if, like when I was younger, my mum often accused me of being lazy, I wouldn't just go, no, I picked up my socks. End of story. I'd be like, no, I picked up my socks. I'm always walking the dog. I do the dishwasher every night. The more of those examples you've got, the more likely you are to win your argument. So you can see here I've put yellow next to my different pieces of evidence that I'm using to show how me getting a bit less healthy, to prove that I got a little bit less healthy. Ultimately, of course, at the end, I prove why that's not the biggest consequence, but you've got to go bringing these bits of evidence in because it makes your whole essay stronger. So if you've only used one piece of evidence, or maybe no piece of evidence in a paragraph, this is the sort of thing you need to do. Gather some more evidence to include to make that paragraph stronger. Discourse markers are fantastic words and phrases to use to sort of make your essay flow and make it all hold together. You should have a word wall in your classroom with many of these sorts of words on. You've got this little thing here which you're welcome to pause on. It's all about developing your language and writing like a historian. But to help you even further, the example paragraph I've written, I've taken all of the other highlights out of it and just highlighted where the discourse markers are, and hopefully you can see how they help me sound a little bit more like a historian, and also how they help my argument to develop. They help me to explain things, like using the words like therefore. It's like therefore this happened, and you can steal some of the discourse markers from the other page, from the word wall, or even take some of mine from here to try to include some more in your own essay to make you sound a little bit more like a historian. Your challenge would be to write a paragraph with at least 4 highlighted discourse markers in it. If you want a super challenge, you'll see that I've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in mine. So see if you can write one with 9 if you want a super challenge. That's your green pen challenge. And so I would pause and read this example conclusion if your target is to write a conclusion as your green pen improvement. As it says at the top there, a conclusion should be firm, just a smidgen arrogant. You don't say I think, it's like it was, and very argumentative. And you can read mine through here and use some phrases, certainly start with in conclusion. Down the bottom there you can see my last paragraph is thus. Thus always makes you sound clever. You can steal that and use that. But if you've been given a target that you need to improve your conclusion, well, here's an example for you to base that conclusion on. Okay, so just to recap, don't be writing I think maybe this, or it's a bit of both. You've got to come down on one or the other. It was castles, it wasn't castles, it was this, it was that. Whatever it is, it's got to be clear but proven a little bit as well. That's the other thing about a conclusion. It's where you sort of summarise but prove you are right.